have a coaching client from many years ago who put his life savings into a health center, and he was doing really, really well. And then the pandemic hit and literally zero clients. On the verge of bankruptcy right now, probably will lose everything. I have another friend who has had a restaurant for over 20 years. Again, right on the verge of bankruptcy. I don't think he'll make it through the pandemic. And lastly, I have a number of former students here in Barcelona who worked in the travel industry. Barcelona is kind of a tech travel hub with booking.com and big Airbnb offices and things. And they've just lost their jobs. They're just gone. Right? And so in the past year, the pandemic has affected pretty much everyone's work. And maybe in the best case scenario, that means you're in your pajamas with your laptop in the living room. Worst case scenario, maybe your whole industry is, at least for the time being, completely gone. And the question is, what do you do? Well, on the one hand, it's a total upheaval and it's scary and it's unsettling. On the other hand, it's an opportunity to reinvent yourself, perhaps for the better. A lot of people lost jobs that they weren't that passionate about. And I know that because, well, about 70, 80% of people are pretty unhappy with their job before the pandemic. And so they've lost something they didn't like. That doesn't mean that makes it any easier, but perhaps this is a time to reinvent. And I have personally reinvented my life and my lifestyle, even my geography, more times than I can count. And this past year has been a reinvention for me too. And I've just been doing a lot of thinking about how to do that better, a little more gracefully. Can't say that I'm an expert at the grace part, but my guest on this week's show potentially is. She is an author, an expert, kind of a pivot expert. She has this new book called U-Turn, meaning like you, turn, pivot, change your life. Hope you find it useful. If you're new here, it's the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm a yoga teacher, a trainer. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm a father. But first and foremost, I'm a student. I like to learn things. So I go out into the world and find people who are writing books, doing research, medical doctors, meditation teachers, all of the above. And I try to bring their best work here so that hopefully we can all live more fulfilled lives. Let's see how it goes. If you like this show, what I'd ask of you is to leave a rating and review. Whatever app you're listening on, just scroll down and should be able to leave a rating and review there. If you have questions for the show, connect with me on Instagram. It's at Lucas Rockwood. Finally, if you'd like to be on my weekly update email list, go to yogabody.com/sign me up. I send out an email about once a week with classes that I'm teaching, updates about the show, and other little tidbits from the weird world of Lucas Rockwood. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy. Great. So hello and welcome, everyone. Today's show is called How to Find Your Purpose. And I am joined here with Ashley Stahl. Ashley's a career coach, a speaker, an author. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, CBS, South Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, and a whole bunch of other places. She's the author of a new book. It's called U-Turn, like Y-O-U-Turn. And you can learn more at her book site, which is uturnbook.com. And that's spelled YOUturnbook.com. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I've heard you pose this question, what do you know that you wish you didn't know? And I thought that was kind of a provocative one. Can you tell us a little bit about that question? I know you use it with coaching clients and things like this. Help us understand what that's all about.
Yeah, I ask myself this question in my journal quite often, and it never gets old and it never gets less terrifying because I think most of us are walking around knowing something at any given time, and it's something that's maybe inconvenient about our lives and inconvenient to face. And when we face that thing, it sometimes requires us to kind of unravel what we're doing in some way so that we can come together in a better way. And so for anybody listening, maybe the question, what do you know that you wish you didn't know, brings up some reflection about your career. Maybe you know you're in the wrong career path for you and it's just really inconvenient, or you feel like you're getting paid a certain amount and you don't want to rework your life because of it. Or maybe some people know things about their marriage or their health. I can't believe the amount of people who they know something's wrong with their health, but they don't want to go to the doctor and find out the answer, And the truth is the thing is there regardless. And so we spend a lot of time in our lives resisting what we know and coordinating our lives around that resistance. And so for me as a career expert, this question has been pretty central for me to have a quality of life myself, but also to help people, whether it's through my podcast, through my book, through anything I put out there, with getting started with the truth, because you can't really change your life or your career until you're being radically honest with yourself. And that is the crux of this concept of making a U-turn.
One of the challenges that I know that you're right. A lot of people have these things they know, like their marriage is no good, or that their job is never going to work, or that I meet a lot of people who they're just like the city they're living in is just never going to make them happy, and they know this. I guess the challenge that I hear a lot of people articulate is like the ... and then what? You know what I mean? Because a lot of people don't have the other side of that hellhole. They don't know. They know that job doesn't work, but they have no idea what to do. They know that their living situation doesn't work, but they just can't even wrap their head around an alternative. And I had a friend say something to me recently, which really made me think. She's in a bad relationship, and she knows that it's not going to work, and she's very rational about it. It's a long time not working, and she says, things might get worse if I leave, and so that's why I'm staying. I thought, that's both tragic and true, and I don't even know what to say to that. And I think a lot of people feel like that. They're in a job that maybe they don't like that much, but it keeps their family comfortable, and the economy might be a little wobbly right now. And so how do you help people deal with like the certainty of the situation being wrong, and then the inevitable uncertainty of not knowing what comes after that?
Yeah. Well, certainty has always been an illusion, hasn't it? Like even
True.
when, for me, I used to think that
Yeah.
when I was in the workforce that I would have security through a job, but then we all see that the moment the economy changes, nobody's secure in their job. People who had jobs for decades at the same company are getting laid off. And so what I've found is that security is a job within yourself. And part of that starts for me as an entrepreneur on a tactical level with learning how to build my business myself, learning how to look at the ceiling when I'm, kind of in deep thought and say to myself, how do I create more abundance, whether it's financially, whether it's spiritually in my career. That being said, the times that we've had historically of downturn have also been rapid times of innovation. We are in a huge quickening right now. And more than ever, it's funny. It's like that quote. It's something along the lines of, there are some weeks where decades happen, and there are some decades that pass for a week to happen. And we are right now in weeks where decades of progress are happening. And with that, there's a certain percentage of jobs right now. I believe it's around 15% of job titles that don't exist right now for Generation Z who are new to the workforce. And so as a result, I think it's just important to realize that you can take your core skill set. And that's what I'm most focused on as a career expert is what is your skills? Because those translate across all sorts of different interests and industries. But really take a look at what's growing right now. And it's not to say you need to bend to the workforce and make yourself work for it. I think your life and your experience is here to serve you. You're not here to serve it. It's the same with your degree. You're not here to stay somewhere stuck because of your degree or the money you spent on it. That being said, there is always massive innovation happening. And I think it's really on us to research where that is. I know that the e-commerce space right now is exploding as it was expected to even before COVID. It's had steady growth. The healthcare space is exploding. Nurses are going to be needed 52% more in the next year. So it's important to be able to look at that with, also technology and artificial intelligence. So I would ask anybody and I would challenge them to say, is it really an uncertain time, or is it just that things are getting shaken up and you can really take a look with clarity at what industries are clearly growing and where there is a rock solid foundation that is being put in place right now?
It's a great way to frame things. I always just think too, in terms of, I'm in the product business, but mostly in the service business. I just think like, if I can help people with fundamental problems, economy can go up and down. It's not to say that I'm not going to have a bad period or whatever, but if you have a fundamental skill set you can solve, if you can write or speak or, like you said, be a nurse and inject an IV or a vaccine, or like, if you have a hard skill, I meet a lot of people who don't have any hard skills these days. Meaning like a lot of people can't type. They don't actually know. I had an intern in the office and she was like, what's that box under the desk? I was like, that's a computer. She'd only worked on laptops. Like really just lacking like hard skills. Like, I don't know, like, can you update a web page? Can you use Photoshop? Like, have you spent the 50 hours it takes to slug through Excel and learn how that works? And I think like, in lieu of a better idea, I just think it's a good idea just to like learn a new skill. And so I just don't think I've never regretted learning a new skill. There's a bunch of stuff that I hated learning, like Excel and like, Photoshop and these kinds of things. But it's very hard to go wrong. And I think we're in a funny place right now. I have a daughter who's 16, and her generation's in a funny place. They think about jobs in a very funny way, not necessarily a bad way, but like when I was a kid, I just wanted like hard skills. I was like, I must learn Microsoft Office. I must become a fast typer. I must, like fix my grammar. My grammar sucks, and they're just much more flowy. And who knows? Maybe they'll be happier than me, but it makes me nervous because I was like, what can you actually do? The economy here is like a total disaster, total train wreck. And it's just very clear who has hard skills and who doesn't. Like the people in the trade industry, they're doing just fine. They're fixing houses and fixing doors, and the computer programmers, they're all busy, they're all working. The people who have sort of undefined skills, I think, are really struggling. And so I don't know. I think and this leads into my next question. What do you do when people don't know their purpose? And I guess, does everybody have a purpose?
Yeah.
Does everybody have a purpose?
Yeah, this question I sat with for a long time, Lucas,
Yeah.
and it kind of messed with me as a career expert because so many people have come to me over the past decade with wanting help, and it doesn't feel helpful for me to think of myself like maybe that some people just don't have a gift. And what I have learned is that everybody is a snowflake. Everybody does have something unique to offer. On the employee or worker side of things, so me taking myself out of like the girl that works for you who's like, what is that? And it's a computer. Yeah. On her side of the fence, I would say celebrate when you're not good at something and realize that you are good at something else. And it's important for you to know what that thing is. In my book in chapter 2, I talk about 10 core skill sets, which I'm happy to go through if it's helpful, what the 10 are. I do feel like most people fall under those 10, and success is really linked to knowing what that gift is and really putting your chips into harnessing and growing that gift throughout your career with those core skill sets. The other thing I would say, though, on your side of the fence is, and I'm, for me being an employer as well, now is not the time for people to be saying that that's not in my job description. Now is not the time for people to say, like, we didn't talk about this and I can't do this. This isn't in my lane. Here's the deal. Everybody read the book Sapiens pretty much. And being a super bestseller it was, the biggest message that came out of it for me was the key for the future is the skill to reinvent yourself. And that is becoming more and more true with where we are right now. And I continue to read the literature, whether it's Harvard Business Review talking about adaptability. Adaptability is the skill, and futurists like Peter Diamandis, all sorts of different ones, are going to keep arguing that soft skills matter more than hard skills because we are in a time right now where robots are going to continue replacing people on more tactical, automatable skills. Yeah. And yet, we're still human. And when we work with people, we want to feel like we're connected to the human that they are. And so I think on the other person's side of the fence, it's, can you know what your skills are so that you can show up in an area that you can contribute? And I think on the hiring manager side of the fence, it's a game of, do I connect with this person and are they adaptable and willing to reinvent themselves while knowing what their skills are? And so I think it's just a red flag if anybody right now is saying, I'm not willing to learn. This is a perfect time to be upskilling. And you're totally right. Sometimes it kind of holds us hostage in our careers when we don't want to spend the 5 uncomfortable hours learning Excel or whatever it is. But we'll spend weeks of our lives like damaging our work relationships because we don't want to learn a 5-hour thing. It's like discipline, like I love pizza, but if I eat a whole pie, I'm going to be sick, and it's like discipline is the key to my freedom in that way. And I think it's the same with people in the workforce is don't let something you don't know hold you hostage. Set yourself free by knowing that information, even if it's uncomfortable.
I think a lot about meta skills too, like speaking and writing, critical thinking, communication, PowerPoint, just these kinds of things. And I was talking to a guy earlier today, a writer, and he has 2 master's degrees, and he was lamenting the fact that he spent $300,000 on university or whatever. And I was saying, yeah, but you can write. Like, so what if you're not doing anything? Like, he's making a great living working from home, and he can write. Like that's a meta skill that works. Like that was a positive outcome. Like, so what if you went to school for comparative religion? You could write. Like that's massive, you know? Or if you can speak, it's incredible. It's incredible. There's so few people, you know. I think of somebody, it was in some clubhouse room with Elon Musk the other day, and he's just such a lousy speaker. He's just horrible. Just imagine if he had good diction. Imagine if he could speak well. He could be a king. And he is a king in his own little world, but wow, he's difficult to listen to. He really has no, think if he was a powerful orator. I mean,
right. Well, we need him to be a good speaker if he's deciding to make the choice speaking. And I think one of the most damaging things you can do in your career is step into a core skill set that is overriding who you are and requiring you to show up in the majority of your work in an area that is exhausting to you and that you don't have skills. It's not to say that there's not an argument for nature versus nurture. Like if somebody has all of these other things going on and it would be helpful for them to also work on their speaking, I'm convinced that somebody can work on it and be really great. It's interesting for me, even as a speaker, because there's really two camps that I've noticed in our arena, Lucas, with people who are content creators. One area is my friends who are super brilliant and they just channel. So they get on stage and they're like, let me just feel what I feel. And they have a gift for being able to do that. I'm more of a performer. So if you see my TED Talk, I'm kind of like the Hamilton play in New York. Like what you're going to get on Thursday is what you're going to get on Friday. I'm consistent because I've prepared. And so I think, you know, sometimes it's about people who don't have the gift. Other times it's about people who are working super hard. You know, I feel like a little bit of a duck sometimes in the speaking circuit where I've had a lot of success in it, but under the water, like my feet are totally pedaling and I'm working super hard on the craft versus other people who walk on and they're just as magnetic and they didn't put half the time in for practice. So it's not to say that I don't have the skill, but I will say that I have committed to getting that A+. And I think that 5%, like that 10% between an A- and A+, that is where the hardest work is. That's where the top performers live. And in a lot of areas of my skill sets, I choose to be A- because
it's not worth it.
But it's usually in areas that I'm gifted where I'm like, I'm really good at writing. So I'm not going to do the extra round of edits on the thing because I'd rather go put my energy here or there. So I think for people knowing your skill set and really getting out of the belief that you need to follow your passion, because that's like the worst advice. I mean, passion matters and it's significant, but it's so much more secondary in your career to who you are, where your skills are, what your natural gifts are. One of the core skill sets that I have in my list of 10 is words. And I would say you probably have some of that one clearly as well. I always think that people should lead with one core skill set because you can't be focusing on being excellent in 5 areas. So it's really about thinking, what is that one that you have a gift around? And then more importantly, are you introverted or are you extroverted? Because there's a lot of people like that guy you talked about, that writer who spent all his money on his degree. And I love your story about him because I think he's really a representation of a lot of people who forget that even if where they're going in the future doesn't feel like it's linked to the past, there is a way to pull a thread of what you took from the future and carry it into the past. And when you can communicate that, when you can make sense of that, whether you're in a job interview or you're on a stage trying to get clients or whatever you're doing as a business owner, that's where the gold is being able to make sense of your path for other people. But knowing whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, I think is highly helpful because that writer, he might think to himself, I'm good with words. That's the core skill set that I've highlighted in my book is words. But if he's introverted, there's an internal way to be expressing words, and that's through writing. Even podcasting is arguably quite internal, especially if you're audio only. The external extrovert words people are on stage. They're in business development. They're talent agents. They are turning words into money and they're doing it in an extroverted way. So I think even if you go through my 10 core skill sets or not, really knowing whether you're introverted or extroverted with your skill is really important.
What happens for, I think, a lot of people is they're in kind of like nondescript, totally respectable jobs. And it's very difficult to pull out what they're passionate about, where they should explore. So somebody has like some kind of mid-level management job in a, Fortune 500 company or some big multinational or whatever, totally respectable job. They're bored out of their brain. They're in their mid 40s. The kids are starting to get a little older. They want out. they have no idea what their purpose or their passion or even what they're good at. On a monthly basis, they might do a little bit of expense reports, a little bit of event planning, maybe they're in a marketing department, and that can mean so many different things. And they've developed a very respectable skill set as part of an organism. And it's very difficult to pull them out of the organism and even for them to define what they really do. And this is not to diminish those jobs at all. I think a lot of those people are living a much more balanced, healthy life than me. But at the same time, you can look at my day and you can figure out exactly what I do and what I don't do. And at least for some people who are on the outside, that's interesting. For me, it's just kind of torture. But for those kinds of people, how do you help them? How do you help them parse out what's there, what's underneath that? 10, 15 years invested in a corporate job. You have a title like a marketing manager or regional director of distribution or something like that. And again, none of this is disparaging. I have nothing but respect for every job, but these are difficult jobs for people to pull words like purpose and meaning and passion from.
That's, I think, why I'm really focused on gifts and not on passions. I think passions is a backdrop. So if I'm passionate about politics, like I used to work in counterterrorism in my early 20s because I had an interest in politics. But here's what's so slippery about that. I ended up getting into the Pentagon and doing intelligence analysis. And I thought to myself, like, I'm good at words. I'm good at writing. I have 2 master's degrees. I wrote a lot. Of course, this is going to be perfect for me. But the truth of the matter was that core skill set that I was using at the Pentagon wasn't words. It was analysis. Analysis isn't my jam.
Yeah.
And I misunderstood that. So I think for the people who you're talking about, I don't actually believe that there are people that are so jack of all trades, master of none, that they don't have a skill set. I think that they haven't noticed, or they've been asked to be doing so many different tasks, and maybe they've learned how to do them well, that they've lost touch with where they really are truly gifted. And it's actually a loss for the business, because if the business learned where they were really able to make an impact for them, and they up volume on that human being, it would be incredible. So one skill set that I know is very common that some people think, oh, and this is also one of my 10. So we've got words, we've got analysis. Another one is coordination. And thank God for the coordinators. Like my life would be in shambles without these people. And you were describing somebody just now. It kind of reminded me of my project manager on my team. She's like, if I removed her from my organism of my company, it's like she's doing a whole array of things. Like the real smorgasbord of tasks. And if I look at my list of core skill sets, she's a coordinator. She knows how to get things done. I don't need to follow up with her twice. It gets done right the first time. She follows up. She's executing. She's a project manager. So even for those people who are doing a lot, I think the question that they could be asking other people, because according to research, especially with relationship research, apparently our friends know if we're destined for divorce more than we do. And I think it's the same thing with your career. Like your friends know if you're in the wrong path more than you do, because they're neutral. They're just observing versus you've got skin in the game. You don't want to have bad news about where you are. And so I think it's important to ask the people around you, where have you seen me at my best? And I would ask your parents. I would ask, if you're in school, a couple professors. I would ask colleagues, if you're working, like colleagues you're comfortable asking, some that you're super close to, maybe a couple that you're medium close to. And I wouldn't just ask them verbally. I would text it to them. I would email them and be like, some crazy career expert on the Lucas Rockford show wants me to ask you when you've seen me at my best. Notice what skills you're using when people give you that compliment. Notice who you're being and how you have to be. Who do you need to be that person at your best? What are the skills you're using? That's really gives you light into where you really do have gifts beyond those 10 core skill sets. And if you read my book or even just listen to this conversation, they already know there's analysis and words and coordination. A few other skill sets are service, being a helper. That's kind of a slippery one, because sometimes people think that they're a helper, but really it's just a coping mechanism they learned as a kid to be a people pleaser. And I think you can ask yourself that question with any skill. Like, is this really a gift I have? Maybe it is, but is it coming from trauma? Like, did I just learn to do this way in my life? So service is a good one to look at, the helpers of the world, the innovation skill set, the intrapreneur, the entrepreneur, the creative self-starter that's solving problems. They're all skill sets that people do innately have. And whether they've harnessed them or not, they're living inside of them. And I think it's just really important for companies to start maximizing on that I don't think that people don't have skills, which you're talking about. I think, and you haven't really suggested that, but what I actually think is that they don't have motivation. Like maybe they're not being used.
Yeah.
And that is really unmotivating. Like I remember having studied national security, and before I got to the Pentagon, I graduated during the recession and I landed in an admin job making minimum wage. And, at night I was taking Arabic at UCLA, trying to get into the CIA. And during the day, I'm like processing some executives' expenses with a master's degree and a triple major at the top of my class. And it's not to say I have an ego. I just knew that I was a hard worker. I had something to offer and I wasn't being tapped into. And so that's highly unmotivating. And I think most of the workforce is misplaced. And given that we see the statistic that, at any given moment, 71% of the workforce is looking for a new job, I don't think it's because they simply want a new job. I think it's because they're bored because they're not in the right job. And when they job hunt, it's because they're trying to scratch an itch. They're trying to figure out what's the next thing for me. Can I feel better? Can I feel like something makes more sense? And that's why when you don't have clarity, it's a very expensive thing that happens because then you're just in this graveyard of trial and error, trying to find and scratch that itch versus locking into where you really are gifted. And that's what made me write a book about it.
I have this question that I ask people when I'm doing interviews. I'm like obsessed with interview questions. I keep them, like I keep a whole file of them just to try to ask somebody nothing they've ever heard before. But the one question that I like to ask people is like, family house is on fire. What's your role in the family? What do you do? Or, you and your 5 best friends are starting a business. You have to give yourself a job title today and pick responsibilities, and the other 4 are going to do the other stuff. What are you going to do? These kinds of things, like trying to get like a forcing function, so people put themselves, I think goes exactly to what you're saying. This is my whole thing. I just think people are way too comfortable. They're just way too comfortable. I think everything that I've achieved is only because I've had extreme discomfort and fear of getting back to that discomfort. And when you're comfy and cozy and people are making 6 figures and they have a mid-level job and they have a late model car and they have an okay house, and it's very difficult to motivate to learn Arabic after work. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. People aren't doing that. They aren't doing that. Like some people are, but mostly the people that I meet who are doing that, it's not because of passion, it's because of fear. And this is my whole obsession right now. I see this radical acceleration from COVID. I was like, this is getting a fire under people's asses because they're scared. They're scared. And I wish the carrot enticed me, but no, I need to stick just like everyone else. And wow, it's crazy what people can do when they're scared, but it's really hard to manufacture that fear, especially in places like the US where even poor people are wealthy. A poor person in the US has like a above average salary here in Spain, and they live just a horrible quality of life. It's just a bizarre paradox. So what do you do with it? This is a big thing, so someone is cerebrally dissatisfied, but as a Neolithic, Paleolithic person, they are totally taken care of. You know what I mean? They don't wake up in the morning and suffer at all. They haven't been cold in like 7 years. They haven't been hungry in where does this intrinsic motivation come from? There is no fire under their ass. There's no one chasing them. They've got a bank balance. They've got everything's fine. How can they get excited about a new unknown future?
Yeah, well, I think that comes back to your core values. So I think there's 2 key dynamics in your career. There's the what of what you're doing. That's your skill set. That's like, how are you harnessing your energy from 9 to 5, or maybe if you're like me sometimes from 9 to 9,
Yeah.
And then the second thing is the how of how you do your career. That comes back to your core values. To me, your values are the non-negotiable principles by which you live your life. And given the fact that 50% of people leave their job because they don't like their boss, what we know is that how your job looks matters. And so when we look at that, I think it comes back to maybe that person who is kind of feeling like that water in a pond where like nothing's moving and they're kind of stagnant. if their core values are being honored, maybe they value family, and like, as long as they can support their family and they have a lot of time for their family, that's amazing. Maybe they value wellness, and because their job isn't demanding a lot of their energy and their needs are met, they can spend a lot of time on their wellness. Because if there's anything I've learned on my own wellness journey, wellness takes time. It's like a hobby. It's like a huge percent of my
part-time job.
Day. Yeah. And so I think it comes back to, what are the key ingredients? What are the core values that you hold? Maybe your top 3, 4, 5 of them at most, that are non-negotiable principles by which you live your life. And I think the person who appears stagnant, what they really are is probably honoring themselves if their values are being met. And if they're not, then they probably will be like, I think it's Emerson or Thoreau wrote, like most men, or I would say women, living lives of quiet desperation.
Interesting conversation. Tell people about your book, who it's for, and where they can pick it up.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I love talking about this book. It has just been like such a little sunbeam for me. It's bright yellow, so you can't miss it. But it's called U-Turn, like you said, YOU. And the subtitle is Get Unstuck, Discover Your Direction, Design Your Dream Career. And I wrote it for anyone in the workforce or even entrepreneurs who are really asking that question of like, is this it? Does something feel like, if something feels like it's missing for you in your work? And it has an 11-step roadmap to help you kind of reconnect to who you truly are and what that means for your career options. So I'm really excited that it's getting out there. I love hearing from people who are getting so much clarity on what they want to do next. And I guess that's what happens when you're working in your zone of genius. Is for me, it's actually quite simple, helping people clarify where their skills are. But for other people, I know it's not. So it's been really cool to put a 300-page body of work out there that I know people can kind of walk away as their own guru at that point on themselves.
Well, perfect. Well, actually, I appreciate you coming on the show. We'll send people to uturnbook.com, and let's keep in touch. For the first time ever, Yoga Alliance has opened up their bar standard, their 200-hour certification for online-only training. Because of COVID-19, obviously, we can't train in person. And so the 200-hour training, if you don't know, is kind of the gold standard. It's what about 95% of yoga teachers teaching in studios or fitness centers or at home or privately, wherever. It's about what 95% of people use for their teaching credential. And historically needed to spend about 3 weeks in person, which was great. We had people coming from all over the world to Barcelona to train with us. And so when COVID happened, obviously we went online, and we were online only. We always had fusion courses. We were really nervous about the change. Could we do it? Could we actually train people only virtually without hands on toes and these kinds of things? And I have to say, not only has it gone well, in many ways it's gone better than our in-person course. Why? First reason is we have more time, so instead of cramming everything into 3 weeks, we take a full 8 weeks. Second reason is the technology has some real advantages. We can zoom in on students, we do hot seats, we do workshops, we have quite a large training team giving feedback on a daily basis. So you join a live class, you get feedback about your practice, you get up on camera and you teach. It's incredibly interactive, the community is really strong. The short story is I'm really excited about this. It's working great. We have a new batch starting here very, very shortly to learn about our upcoming course. We've already got a great group of students signed up, and the trainers and I are excited. Go to yogateacherscollege.com and we'll share more details. So if you're thinking about becoming a yoga teacher, if you'd like to make the most of this COVID time, it's a great time to get certified at home. This week's nutritional tip comes in response to a listener question. Listener Sarah on Instagram says, Lucas, I know I should be eating more salad, but somehow I find it boring. I tend to eat a lot of blended soups. So this is cooked food instead of raw food. Is there really a difference whether it's cooked or raw? I know you used to eat raw food for years. I appreciate the question, Sarah. Yeah, so I ate just raw food for 2 full years. Got very skinny, and I got pretty healthy, actually. I did pretty well, except for the fact that a strong wind could blow me away. But here's the deal with raw foods is a lot of micronutrients don't like heat. In fact, not much really likes heat. Let's imagine you have a nice sweater, a nice jacket. You leave it out in the sun, in the heat, it will start to fall apart, right? That same sort of degradation happens to vitamins, and it happens to the absorbability of minerals. You don't destroy the minerals, but they become less bioavailable, specifically because active cofactors like enzymes and things get destroyed. You know the feeling when you have fresh food or processed food. Intrinsically, everyone knows that fresh food tastes better, is better, healthier, more nutrients. A lot of that has to do with the bioavailability of the nutrients. A lot of that has to do with those active enzymes At the same time, plant foods, a lot of them, they don't want you to eat them. So something like rice, for example, is you got to do a whole bunch of things before you can eat rice. And so processing, cooking rice makes a lot of sense. Let's loop back to your original question. Do you need to eat salad to be healthy? I think the quintessential health food is salad. But a lot of people are eating really lame salads. They're eating romaine lettuce, iceberg lettuce as the base, and not much nutritional density there. So let's imagine, Sarah, you're making soups with more micronutrient-dense greens, and perhaps greens that do better with cooking, things like kale and chard and spinach and mustard greens and beetroot tops and these kinds of things, which are really delicious and relatively easy to absorb when they're cooked, but not so great when they're raw. Then I would say in many cases, your soup might be doing better. People will make arguments that because of your dosha, because of your constitution, because of your prakriti, your body type, that different people should eat cooked versus raw food. I've never really found any science basis to that, but certainly anecdotally, you'll find that some people, they just don't do so well with lots and lots of fiber in the raw form, but they do much better with blended food. So when I think about boosting up micronutrients, when I think about boosting up fiber, I'm not so worried about whether it's cooked or raw so much these days, but I do worry about quantity and I do worry about freshness. So a soup in a can obviously is pretty dead, pretty lifeless, a lot of preservatives, a lot of salt, and a soup that you make by steaming some dark greens, throw it in a blender with some coconut oil and some butter, well, that's a totally different story. So sounds like you're on the right track. I'd encourage you to keep going. We have a question from Bartham on Instagram. Bartham says, Lucas, I'm working a lot from home. I think I'm developing text neck. I was always a little hunched in my shoulders because I'm tall, and I developed this pattern early on in my life to hunch over. And now that I'm in my late 30s, I think it's getting worse. Is there anything that I can do? So an excessive kyphotic curve, a kyphosis, a hunchback, has been a hazard for a lot of jobs in the past, like hairdressers and servers and flight staff, people who are holding things in their arms all the time, including child minders, caregivers, new mothers. Very often, it's very common to develop an exaggerated kyphotic curve, upper back curve. The text neck phenomenon is kind of the upstream effect of that, and it's been exacerbated, of course, with all of us sitting at home, hovered over our laptop on the couch. So what do you do about that? Well, definitely doing some deep stretching can help. We don't stretch the neck area specifically in gravity yoga because it's so delicate, but we work downstream, so specifically in the shoulders and upper back, and we allow the head and neck to relax and stretch in a very passive, gentle way. Poses that would work on cervical spine extension, for example, would be things like noodle pose, where we go backwards. Here's a quick stretch break that you can do during your day just to simply try to counteract all that chin to chest cervical spinal flexion. If you set a timer, Bartham, on your phone to go off every hour, and when it goes off, just hit stop on your alarm, reach back and interlace your hands behind your back, lift your chin up until your head goes all the way back, and then count down from 20. If you do that once an hour throughout the day, very likely you can start to counteract some of that imbalance. At the same time, I'd encourage you to play around with your workstation. We might be at this homework thing forever. So what can that mean? Putting a box on top of a countertop, sitting down next to a coffee table, mixing up your posture throughout the day, trying to get yourself into something that's a little bit more ergonomically sound. Hope that's helpful. Thanks for listening to The Lucas Rockwood Show. If you enjoy the podcast, I have two asks of you. Number one, share the show on social media with your friends and tag me. My handle is @LucasRockwood. Number two is please leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my mailing list, every week I send out information about the podcast, behind the scenes stuff, announcements of online classes and special events. I email about once a week. You can do that at yogabody.com/sign me up. And right now we have a free breathing worksheet on that page as well. It's yogabody.com/sign me up. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.